All right, welcome back. After a short delay, which only we know about because we'll post this more consecutively. To Abstract Particulars with Karen, Josh, Kenny, and myself, Rodrigo, and we are reading a sequence of papers, mostly from a couple of anthologies, one by E.J. Lowe called Truth and Truthmaking. And we haven't gotten to the other one, so I won't mention it. Today, we didn't even read a paper from the collection, but rather motivated by what we've read so far. It was another by David Armstrong, Truth Makers for Modal Truths. And the motivation is clear, and that is dealing with necessary truths is a difficulty because of the entailment principle and because of what we've decided to call the slingshot argument, although I'm not sure any of the things we've read called it that. At any rate, it's an argument that reoccurs in almost every paper we've read and occurred in this one as well, showing that any truth maker for a contingent truth will make all the necessary truths true on an overly simple account of truth making. And Armstrong seemed to have, in our judgment, the best account that isn't crazy, according to E3. My favorite is Thesis. And so we're going to see what he does when he faces the problem with focus. And that's what we read for today. So I was not especially impressed by his efforts, although I'm willing to admit that I can't think of how anyone could have done better, short of falling into the madness of the pluriverse. But I'm curious how satisfied the three of you were, and if not, then what remains for hopes for truth makers for necessary truths. So let's see what you all thought. Kenny, why don't you go first?
All right. I found this paper rough. I had a hard time with it. So many questions just kept coming up that I felt like were either not answered or I was uncertain about what he was really saying. So I'm going to have all sorts of questions and potential objections that I thought of, that I thought he must have thought of this it, but at some point I just had to stop like writing notes in the margin and just read. This issue about contingency and trying to be as parsimonious with the truth makers as possible is something that I understand. Like, I understand the motivation for it. However, I didn't. I wasn't sure I could quite buy his argument. This in particular, this premise too early in the paper was hard for me. That I thought was the sticking point, maybe. And I mean, in a way, the entirety of the rest of the paper is built off of it. So, but yeah, no, I mean, it was, it's a full, throated, overall account of modal truth makers. And I had no idea how anybody was going to really do this. So I was impressed, in that respect. And I was also impressed, that he does try to, at certain points, stay as neutral as possible. Which I thought was good. But then there were other things where, which I just felt needed to be spelled out more. So I don't know. I'll be very curious to see how everybody else reacts to it.
That's true for pessimism. Can we get an optimism, or should who wants to be optimistic? No. All right, then Karen next.
Well, I'll be optimistic.
Okay, good.
Because yeah, I enjoyed this article very much, though he does sort of back away from the debate in various spots where it just starts to get juicy and interesting, right? Because I think he says he hasn't figured that part out yet. I like the ontological, that he's sort of an ontological conservative, right? So if there's something that's making the propositions that are true in our world true, it seems like really nice to say it's our world, right? That's doing that, and not a pluriverse of alternative worlds that are not our world, or a realm of
crazy
platonic
talk. Just
forms or abstract objects, right? But I don't know that I want to be thoroughly conservative in the way that he is, and that I think maybe our world is richer than he gives it credit for in terms of the existence of abstract entities. I'm not sure that you have to be too crazy to allow some of those in, but and maybe even things like fictional objects where those are some sort of artifact or something like that. But I did like his sort of basic point here, that you don't need to get very crazy to give an account of what makes something like the cat, it's possible for the cat to be on the mat true. You just need the cat's not being on the mat to be something that's contingent. I think that the devil's in the details, right? Because it's hard for me to understand the notion of contingency without already having something like possibility built in. So if you're using contingency to explain possibility, there might be some, maybe it's just one of those sort of what we call prime notions that's always going to be interdefinable. It's not, you can't work that out. So, but a lot's going to hang on that. And I think he gives it like maybe a paragraph where he just says it, contingency, it seems to be, it's going to be something about the state of the world itself that explains its contingent nature rather than its necessary nature. So that needs work. But I do like that he very clearly said, I wasn't clear about this in the past, but the connection between truth makers and the propositions they make true is not entailment, because truth makers are not propositions, right? So that, I know we were trying to figure that out, right? And he's just very clear about it, right? So, but then this notion of a necessitation, I'm not sure how that holds between as a cross categorical concept. So yeah, so the sort of some of the things that I want to talk about. But I liked his, like I said, I liked his ontological conservatism here, because it seemed sane.
necessary, as it were.
Yes.
And Josh, does this conservatism seem necessary to you? And if so, what makes that true?
I'm going to start off by reading a line from the second section. These philosophers, so one of them being Lewis and the other Plantinga, it seems to me, have not so much brought in men to do a boy's work, but have rather brought in giants to do a child's work. This just sums up my thoughts on modal realism, on abstract entities. I am officially an Armstrongian through and through. This is kind of bittersweet for me, because I didn't realize that there was a philosopher that had various theories on things from meanings, propositions, abstraction, number, that were all identical to mine. So I discovered that I'm not going to be advancing any of these areas of research in philosophy, but I found an incredible ally, and some good validation that I wasn't just making up stuff as I went along. But I will agree with Karen's point that the contingency grounding or solving the entailment problem, and also introducing truth makers for possibility, I found curious. I wasn't sure if that would work, but I liked it. I liked the direction. And it was very similar to thoughts I had about false makers more broadly, that if something makes something else true, it seems obvious that it would also be a false maker. So if you have something, a truth about an actuality, it would seem that unless it's a necessary existence, it would then make true the possibility. And so when he spelled that out, I was like, oh yeah, obviously that's how you do it. But what is contingency? What's a contingent truth then? that's where I was like, okay, well, I mean, that seems like that's where the work has to go. But I very much like his accounts of propositions, of logic as being an exploration of possibility. Like that's everything he says about logic. He says about empirical structure, the relation of numbers to the world, and how you can even instantiate numbers just in mathematics, right? So you have, 7 things instantiating, the number 7, but also within any sort of equations, you might have instantiations of 12. And I thought there's more to be said there. Like, it might be that, 7 and 5, any 7 and 5 equal a particularly instantiated 12. Specifically, where that 12 is the product is the sum of 7 and 5, because obviously 12 you can also have 6 and 6 and different relationships. So I thought this necessitation makes sense one way but not the other. The other way is a sense of possibility, and to get around that you have either a constitution for necessity, which is kind of the direction he goes for analyticity, but then you get this distinction between a particular 12, like an instantiated 12, and any 7 and 5. So there's some sort of difference here between the directions. But that seems to play well into what he says about this intrinsic relation, making true the necessary truths. There's so much here to go over, and I love it. And yes, the devil will be in the details, but as at least a rough sketch, I mean, this is almost like my entire metaphysical outlook right here in this one paper, little like snippets here and there everywhere. It's great.
Yeah.
So I'm a little off.
The passage you read out loud is my first highlight, except I took it not as something to identify with, but as I found it kind of triggering and a little offensive.
Not a safe space. Not a safe space.
I will say this is an heroic attempt to give an account of truth makers within the framework of modal metaphysics. And he mentions the other modal alternatives, Lewis and Plantinga. But I must admit that I felt more sympathetic to Restall's what was it called? Real entailment, which he mentions in this paper actually. But then he just sort of moves on because he doesn't really want to go that direction. He wants to stay keeping the classical idea of entailment and just using supervenience and other techniques from modal logic to try and as well as the kind of like empiricist naturalist preference for starting with contingency and particularity, to avoid the difficulties with necessary truths that Restall will get around by inventing a new device entirely, right? So there's this, it's part of the conservatism here, right? The metaphysical deflationism, because one doesn't want to postulate too many things, but there are parts of the argument that just feel strained to me, as we'll get to, I'm sure.
All right. Well, I think I'm just gonna stand back and be the one who holds the giants at bay in case the children can't get the job done. But I understand what he's wanting to do, and I suppose I had a time when I was parochial in my attachment to this particular universe. But yeah, I'll just sit here and watch. I'd like to begin actually with just observing that he owns up to having been unclear about the entailment being cross-categorial in earlier writing. This got us in trouble previously, but this time I should hope it's especially clarified in that it's not entailment because that's between propositions. He says it explicitly, but instead something like it. And if there is an entailment, it's between, where does he say it? Something about T exists. Do you remember? There it is. He
So
says,
there's some
um,
triviality
Yeah,
in the
it's
first,
not
in
it's
the
not
second
entailment,
paragraph.
but it's the
Yeah.
simplest idea, the simplest way of getting your mind around what he's calling necessitation.
right. He says, entailment can hold only between propositions, and generally, at least the truth maker for a truth will not be a proposition. The connection is cross-categorial. The simplest, if somewhat uninteresting example of such a necessity holds between any truth maker T and the truth T exists. So that out of the way, he then admits that propositions seem non-natural, right? Because it's not the beliefs or the sentences on the page, but rather he says the intentional objects of said beliefs. What those are, he leaves aside for now, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But for someone who's so concerned to be a naturalist, to exclude modal entities of the kind that Lewis is eager to unleash, he'll have to own up to this as well at some point.
What do you mean, his little shopping list of wanting to give a naturalist empiricist into a degree deflationary count of intentional objects?
Or propositions, intentional, yeah, sure, of intentional objects. He's going to have to add that to the list of things that need to be resolved. Not in this paper, just somewhere.
Right.
Well, this paper is 2003, and he has like 3 or 4 books before this was published. So I'm almost certain he wrote about it in like a World of States of Affairs or something like that.
Well, do you mean, he wrote it as though
he has a theory of propositions, and no, I'm pretty sure he has a theory of propositions.
You mean since then, since 2003?
Before, I'm almost certain he has something from the 90s. I'm not 100% sure, but I would.
Well, I don't doubt it. I just it'd be interesting to see what's in store there. Anyway, he signs up for maximalism and necessitarianism, both of which we covered in a previous reading. Maybe Armstrong's his own. I forget, but he wasn't the only one to. It wasn't only one other paper that affirmed these principles, or at least mentioned them. And this is important for a variety of reasons. The most obvious one being that I think you need truth makers for the negative truths.
And for the modal truths, right, which is
And
what
the
launches
truths.
the weird whatever. So he says that truth maker maximalism is one of the things that launched Lewis and Tinga and others off on their paths. It's all about pigs flying.
It's all about the flying pigs. Yeah, so why don't we just jump right in the premise too, Kenny, since that's right on the second page, and you had a special, I also had.
I did, but I wanted to go through just a couple things in the.
Actually, I got mixed up. It's line 2 on the second page. Has nothing to do with that second premise you're talking about. That's on the 4th page. So yes, there are a few other things to cover before that.
Yeah, but it just briefly, I think there are a few telling things that come out in the background in the introduction. He says, so the first thing that he's doing, that first aspect of his setup, right, is this realism about truth, where the truth is determined by something that lies outside the proposition. That just kind of hangs in the background, but is there. And the second thing is that he's trying to give an account, this is at the bottom of the first page, that is naturalist, empiricist, and to a degree, deflationary. So these are sort of like the things in the background that are motivating the kind of theory that he's going to try to formulate.
Yeah, should we flesh out what those three really are? So naturalist means, what are we excluding there?
A lot of this might be things like, a Meinong or Platonic world of the forms where the objects of thought have to exist, and they might exist in a special way or in a special I don't remember my mind on too well, but I know that he thinks that everything you can think about must exist, but not necessarily be real or natural.
Okay.
Or,
And empiricist, I take to be mainly just having something to work with for an epistemology of modal truths.
yeah, probably. So you don't
Right.
have to.
And well, and
posit-
one which is experience based. Or
right.
whatever.
The a
Of course,
priori doesn't play too much of a role here.
Right.
Yeah.
And then deflationary is clearly a hit on the leashed giants.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I take also the naturalism to be what motivates is possibilism about math.
Yes, I think that's right. Because I mean, yes, yeah, exactly. As Karen was saying, to some extent, that's like the anti-Platonism or anything that might smack of the supernatural in any way whatsoever, or the seemingly nonsensible or strange in the Meinongian sense or whatever.
At least Plantinga is obviously
Variety
a
of problematic
supernaturalist.
things. Sure, right. Yes, yeah, and he wholeheartedly embraces abstraction and abstract entities for his theory of modality, metaphysics of modality.
Let's not mince words. This is a man who also goes for the ontological argument and the like.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So then, what else do we have? 114. This is a review. Okay, this is where he says he's not really going to go the way of Restall. I'm not sure exactly why he set it aside, and I found it also interesting that he that this is related to Jackson too. I haven't read anything by Jackson that speaks to truth makers, and I don't know that he turns up in our collections.
He does.
He does? Okay. So maybe we should look at that if it's got another treatment like Restall, because I liked Restall's very much. I don't know about Reed. Looks like just yet another variation on entailment. He makes reference to systems R and E that suggests to me that in the literature there isn't, there's a nomenclature for these non-classical entailments, and that he's just, referring the classical entailment to the extent that it might be made to work.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is an argument. It's just an effort to see what can be done.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you can do it, all the more power to you.
Maybe.
Right. I mean, like it.
I don't know. The thing I like about the Restall real entailment is that it's not really non-classical. I rather dislike the application of this qualifier because it strikes me as really more like yet another relation between propositions that leaves untouched.
No, I agree. I think it's a little bit disingenuous to not call it to say that it's not classical, because it's still bivalent. It's I mean,
and it doesn't reject
abides by the law of non-contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
if anything, it's more realist, which is the heart of classical.
Right.
But,
yeah.
So nomenclature aside, my point is just that it can't be motivating enough to try to keep it classical, because Restall might be just as classical, but perhaps ampliative, and it's that's not the right word. Let's say, well, it's just insightful, and because it considers relationships beyond the semantic, beyond the syntactic. But that's for another paper. So anyway, he tries to make do with the entailment principle in terms of ordinary entailment, semantic entailment, let's say. And then he immediately rehearses the argument by which a contingent truth maker can be shown to be a truth maker for anything, or at least all the necessary truths. And he says that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And then he jumps into his argument for how the truth maker for not P is non-actually possible is just going to be the truth maker for B, provided P is contingent.
Yeah.
So let's rehearse the argument. I wasn't super happy about it, but it's intelligible and it's interesting and it's definitely worth discussion. So let's just you want to do it yourself, since you had a problem with number 2.
Yeah, so his thesis, which he lays out at the beginning of section 2, is he says, my thesis will be that a perfectly good truth maker for it is possible that pigs should fly is the truth maker for the contingent truth it is not the case that pigs fly. So he wants to take statements of possibility and say their truth makers come from non-modal truths, of the actual world, which are contingent truths. And the issue that I have comes up on page 15. I don't know if people have anything before then, but that they want to go through. But
What page?
15.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, sure. Oh no, 15. Yes, on 15.
All right. Is there anything people wanted to talk about before then, or?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So so even before he gets to, so this is the section where he's repairing the entailment principle, because if you state it too naively, you get the slingshot argument, right? All of these necessary truths are, get made true by everything, which doesn't seem correct intuitively. So he tries to revise Jackson's principle to make it, as he says, contingent through and through, which actually I mentioned this possibility of repairing the thesis when we read the Restall paper. So I was happy to see that somebody brought it up, because it does seem to be the most sort of like direct attempt at revising the same thesis. But then so I didn't have any problem with that aspect of it, right? It was with this 5-step argument that he gives on 15, where he tries to show that the entailment principle, in combination with with a certain truth maker making a contingent truth true will make a certain statement of possibility true. And it's not clear to me that this isn't begging the question, because my understanding of contingency is that a proposition is contingent just in case, if and only if that's it's possible that it's true, and it's possible that it's not the case, right? I mean, it's very, often, you'll even see in some modal logic textbooks, they'll introduce an operator and it's just defined that way. And of course, you can probably interdefine any of the operators, which is part of what's tricky about these kinds of arguments. But it's not clear to me that line 2 isn't equivalent to just saying T makes true that P is possible, and T makes true that not P is possible. And because that's what it is for T to make true that P is contingent.
So
And
what are you
that-
saying?
T-
What are you
T-
saying about
that's-
this?
and that seems to make the argument well, trivial, right?
Right,
Because
but-
the
but maybe-
because line 5 is contained in line 2.
Okay, but
I
what
mean,
are you saying
maybe
about the
the-
relationship from 1 to 2? Like what his contention is that 1 leads to 2. I don't see it at all. But are you saying something about that specifically?
No, I think two is separate. It's not led to by 1.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
He-
there's no therefore, there's no dots.
There are no dots, right? 1 and 2 are supposed to be independently accepted propositions, but he does try to motivate
And well, they're actually
accepting to.
1 and 2 aren't really
Uh,
propositions. That's
no,
the
they-
weird thing. Because I mean, maybe they are in some way.
No,
but
no. Well,
T-
as a whole, they are. They're
As a whole, they are,
propositions
but
about a
yeah,
necessary connection.
about a
yeah.
connection, yeah. So it's a statement about a
Yeah,
connection.
it's weird.
right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
But
Right.
I mean, one of the things you might say here is, look, T is not something that can be, something that could have a possibility operator, right? It's a chunk of the world,
Mhm.
right? So if you can have contingency be a property of a chunk of the world, then maybe you can distinguish it from these notions of possibility as an operator on propositions or a feature of your logical system, right? Just like blueness, so contingency is something like blueness, or maybe that's mind dependent somehow, having a certain mass.
Yeah.
So, but I had the
what's-
same
what-
issue too, right? I'm not sure that contingency and possibility are interdefined and circular somehow. Like I share your worry, but I think what he's gonna, his intuition here is that, look, there's just something about cats being on mats as states of the world that is their contingency, right? Cats can get off mats, right? Like, or something like that, right? So there's something about pigs not being able to fly that's about, they didn't evolve like bats did, like, so they're not flying mammals, but that's not necessary in the way that, say, 1 + 1 is 2 might be necessary. Right. So, and it does seem to be the case. If it's possible for pigs to fly, then it seems to be something about pigs, right? That maybe, their mass is such that they could have wings of a sufficient, I guess what you need breadth and whatever to get them off the ground. There are heavier things that fly, something
Well,
like
you know
that,
what?
right?
No, I think I finally get it. So there, at the end of the paragraph immediately following the schematic presentation of the argument, he says, however one resolves the matter, it is difficult to quarrel with the idea that any truth maker for
Yeah.
P is also the truth maker for P is contingent. When I read that, I merely highlighted it.
Yeah.
But
Right.
But
So did
I
I.
didn't believe it. But now I do believe it because
Right.
Okay.
because contingency follows from actuality, and so
No, there are necessary.
no, sorry,
truths
you're
that
right.
are
No,
actual-
you're right. It doesn't follow.
Well,
It doesn't follow
This is
because
part of why-
contingency is
yeah.
contingency is a claim that it's not necessary,
right.
and that's not
Yeah,
given by
right.
P's truth maker. So no, I don't get it. I was right the first time. Never mind.
Yeah, he ends with this very sure statement that it wasn't clear to me that paragraph did enough to defend that. So that paragraph, which I would like to read, was, I felt, the most problematic paragraph of the paper. Probably the rest, a lot of it was, really good. This was the one I had the most difficulty with, I think, for me, anyways.
Before
So-
you go into it, I acknowledge
Yeah.
that line 2 doesn't have the 3 dots, so it's not intended to follow
Yeah.
logically
Yeah.
from 1.
Yes,
However, he wants it to. He needs
No,
it.
he
Yeah,
doesn't.
no,
He
that's-
doesn't.
well,
He doesn't want to say. Look, because I think if P was something like, let's say it is the case that every state of the world necessitates every necessary truth, then the cat being on the mat is going to necessitate 1 + 1 is 2, but the cat is on the mat doesn't necessitate that 1 + 1 is 2 is contingent. So it's if it is the case, right? This is a separate question of whether
No,
or
but
not
remember
the
the
truth maker
P's,
is the truth for a contingent too.
No, but remember the P's are in a way, there's a lot that's loaded in the background of this presentation as well, of this of the schema of the argument, because although there are statements of contingency in the actual argument schema, we're supposed to take it for granted that that we're restricting ourselves here in this context,
Right.
as
but
per
that's a
Jackson's
separate act of-
principle, to only P's that are contingent
Right,
to
but-
begin with.
But we do that. We do that by giving two premises instead of one. We do that by saying, okay, if there's a truth maker for P, and if that truth maker makes P a contingent statement because of the kind of truth maker it is, right? Because it's dealing with cats and mats and pigs and whether or not they can fly, and not something like A or not A, right? Then,
Yeah.
right. So as he sums it up, he says we can, at the paragraph, the word paragraph right before this, we can now return to the mere possibilities, given that P is true, comma, separate premise, and given that P is contingent, right? So that's what we're capturing in the separate premises 1 and 2. So the first one is there's a truth maker that necessitates P. The second one is that same truth maker necessitates that P is a contingent statement, right?
Mhm.
And so that has to do with the kind of truth maker that I guess that P is, and its T is, and its relationship to the content of P, right?
Mhm.
Its relevance to it, or something like that, and the kind of, so like if this state of the affairs, if it was such that bears could not exist except on mats, then this would still be a truth maker for the necessary claim that bears are on mats. But because of the state of the world that it is, it's also the truth maker for the fact that the bears on the mat happens to be contingent truth, right? It's just the way the bear is separable from the mat without being destroyed. So it's this state of the world. It's the nature of bears and the nature of mats that makes the bear on the mat a contingent truth. But it's both the same state of affairs, right? And I know Rodrigo doesn't like that term, but it's the same, this thing, a part of the universe that makes the bears on the mat a true statement. But it also is this state of the affairs in the universe that makes the bears on the mat a contingent truth, because it's because of bears and mats. They're easily separable.
The problem is that the natures of bears and mats, such that it would be a contingent truth, aren't the kinds of entities we're looking for when we're looking for truth makers. We're looking for something beyond propositions, and their natures are propositional.
I don't know that doesn't seem intuitive to me. Their natures are anything but a proposition. Their natures can be described with propositions, but surely their natures is something in the bear.
Yeah,
I mean, it might be, or their properties. Let's talk about their properties. Their properties are such that, the properties of the mat and the properties of the bear are contingently connected.
Okay, yeah,
by cohabitating a location in space.
Properties are not propositions. I'll give you that, but then that's going to be no less difficult a problem than any of these metaphysical problems for the naturalist and the empiricist. If you give me properties that solves the problems of universals and all the rest, I've got a pluriverse to sell you. So it's like,
no, I don't know. I mean, I think that
conservative.
Why do you need a pluriverse? Why do you need a pluriverse?
You don't need it.
My point of being made of wood.
You don't need it. All I'm saying is that the reservations that one might have about the one are precisely the reservations one would have about the other, unless there's a principled reason to accept one and not the other.
To accept properties and not pluriverses? Or
I wouldn't put it that way, but yes.
Yeah, I don't.
The way I would put it is properties.
I mean, in essence. Okay, yeah. So if you think that properties are not something that an object could possess, they're sort of counterfactual statements, and you can't have counterfactual statements without possible worlds. Maybe is that the way you're going?
Well, I don't want to go they're strong about it. I just want to say that these are the problems that motivate all of this metaphysics. I mean, metaphysics begins with worries about properties, otherwise known as forms and universals. And we out of maybe in the effort to come at these problems from a different angle, we begin to explore modality, then possible worlds, and finally truth makers. But we're not going to solve the truth makers problem by assuming easy solutions to the earlier problems that motivated coming here in the first place.
A lot of Armstrong's metaphysics can sort of be seen as trying to have a conception of properties that is neither the kind of Platonistic, non-causal, really detached from the world thing that Plantinga would go for, nor the, from Armstrong's perspective, overly reductionist to particularist conception of properties that somebody like Lewis will give, because he tries to sort of reduce his to particulars across worlds in a way, right? And so what Armstrong is trying to do is find some way of coming up with a way of saying that properties are possessed by things, but they're not abstract in any vicious sense. But it's also, it's quite a theory on its own. But I think here in this particular argument, there's a lot of subtlety. For example, he relies a lot on. So he starts off wanting to, rather than what Restall did, was to just kind of stick with entailment statements sort of like the whole way through until the end. He's starting with this primitive necessitation operator that he's made, and is trying to give us an understanding of it by seeing how it fits in to certain kinds of argumentation. And but he asks us, in doing so, he asks us to do lots of things. Like in this paragraph, he talks about how T is, that the T in the cases that we are considering is a contingent being, right? As opposed to often when we're doing modal reasoning, often we try to stick to using the labels of necessity and possibility and so on for propositions, and when we don't, and when we predicate them of objects or other things, we often try and find some way to interpret that in terms of a proposition. And and he just, it's not clear to me that he, whether he thinks that there are unique properties that are modal properties, or whether this is just a way of speaking, and he would analyze it away in favor of a contingency operator on a proposition. But because then he asks these strange questions like, could the contingency of T lie outside T? That I thought was the most it's the kind of question I feel like we hadn't heard since
Which one?
1200 or something. Could the contingency of T lie outside T?
Yeah. Right.
I feel like it's the kind of question one hadn't heard since Aquinas or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, but it's to me, it's that kind of question suggests that he's thinking of this, maybe, I don't know, as if entities have modal properties, like in a direct sense.
He says it explicitly. He says whether we need a property of contingency in Ray, like in the thing, right? A special categorical property of the truth maker is a difficult question of metaphysics that I trust need not be entered into here. For myself, I hope to avoid having to postulate such a property.
Yeah, he says he wants to avoid it. but I don't know how one gets what he says immediately after that without without proposing it. Because he says, as you read earlier, however one resolves the matter, it's difficult to quarrel with the idea that any truth maker for P is also the truth maker for P is contingent. And, that if you don't have a property of contingency that's in Ray, that is not, it's not,
Yeah, well, it could,
it's not clear to me that that's true.
it's, I don't know that you have to have a property that is contingency versus certain realities about other kinds of properties and their connections to each other. Right?
Yes, right. So one of the
that's where I
features
think that is.
one of the features that he doesn't quite sort of fully spell out, but is implicit, because the P's are only supposed to be contingent propositions. What that means is that anything that they say about T, or that makes requirements of T, can only make requirements of T's contingently held properties, not any of T's necessarily held or essential properties.
Right, but it's not necessarily saying that there's additional property in our property blocks that is contingency itself, right? So
yeah,
like
right.
if I
it
say,
isn't, yeah, and that's because he's trying to be conservative, but then
right,
it's not
if I
clear.
say
I think I know where the hidden
if I say
premise is.
that the pen is to the left of the bear, and then I go around the rest of my days trying to find where the leftness is in the pen, it could be that that contingency is about something about the types of properties that make the thing it is and make it be in the situation that it's in, that the T represents, right? The old bear on the mat, such that when you're focusing on that truth maker and creating a proposition to describe it, you're describing something that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You're necessitating a truth that doesn't have to be a truth. It can, if certain things were, because like if you think about the way people talk about possibilities, they often immediately go to talking about properties of things. Like, so if you ask, would Tom Selleck have been a good Indiana Jones, people immediately talk about Tom Selleck, the Tom Selleck, and what his properties are. We do go to we don't go to whether or not he had the whiff of contingency about him. Like it's about the actual properties in the world and the kind of properties that they were, and the kind of situation that it would have been if Tom Selleck had been released from his obligations to Magnum PI so that he could be Indiana Jones as intended.
Yeah.
I think I know what the hidden premise might be. One reading of naturalism is to oppose the metaphysics of theology, and among the conclusions of theology are that there are necessary beings. So if he opposes that there are no necessary beings, then all beings are not necessary. They are all contingent. So if any truth has a truth maker, it has to be a contingent truth maker, and as such, of a contingent truth. So he hasn't argued for there not being any necessary beings, but he did say he wants to be a naturalist. So that might be.
Yes, he does talk about necessary beings, right?
He takes some pain actually to argue that mathematical truths won't require us to.
Right, so that suggests to some
necessary.
the same lines.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
That doesn't mean there aren't necessarily things that are true necessarily, but they're not true in virtue of their being necessary beings.
That's right. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So the way that I thought about this was that the contingency of a proposition P entails that it's possible that not P. Otherwise, it's just a proposition that, if true, and we're supposed to be assuming these are true, is necessary, right? So if a true proposition is contingent, then it has to be possible that its opposite were the case, or could have been the case. But it's not clear to me how a truth maker is supposed to, which, like if I have an apple on the table in front of me, there is an apple, and the apple makes that true. It seems intuitive enough that the apple then makes it also true that it's possible that there is an apple because it's actually there. But it's not clear to me that that same apple makes it, can be a truth maker for the possibility of there not being an apple.
Right. And his
Right.
his well his
Or
his I mean, in his answer here is, well, the apple, just in virtue of it not being a necessary being, makes that possibility possible, right? So it's a very,
right.
I mean, there
Yeah.
seems to be really
But
interesting questions here
that's
about,
why it's not clear to me that it doesn't either beg the question or
right,
presuppose a special property of being contingently there or being contingently an apple.
right,
Because
or not
without
special. It's just,
one of those things,
right.
what is it about the apple which explains the possibility of the absence of the apple?
Yeah, I think,
Right.
yeah,
Or perhaps it could have been in an alternate state, right? Like perhaps the apple could have been not on this table, or could have been green, unless but that very same apple, there has to be something about it,
Why?
which is sort of unstated, that makes it the case that the other way it could have been is that there is another way it could have been.
well, I mean, yeah,
Right.
I think that is, I mean,
What I mean
that's not
what I mean is,
hard, right? Like with apples, they're not written into the
well,
fabric of reality.
no, but what I'm saying is that presumably the what underwrites its properties will be certain laws that determine its possibilities and its necessities.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And it won't, and it's not clear to me that it won't be, not merely in virtue of the object, but in virtue of the object and these other laws, that the truth of the contingency is made true.
Right. I think if you have a deterministic enough picture about the natural laws and the universe that is governed by them, then you're going to blur the distinction between necessary truths and possible truths. But that's a consequence of that metaphysics without any of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Right. If this is the best of all possible worlds, so that everything that happens had to happen that way, then there is no possibility.
My point is that there's a possibility. There's a possibility. Sorry. Okay. So the apple has the property of being red, and there's a possibility that it was not red. The redness in it doesn't in itself obviously make it possible that it was any other way. It has to be some feature, some law-like feature of it. Yeah, exactly. Because what I'm saying is, if you go into the operator and work your way out, the redness certainly make it the case that the apple is not red. So then how do we understand it to be making it the case that it's possible that it's not red?
It's just that redness is not necessarily linked to apples. Right.
Right. It's that redness is not necessarily linked to apples, but that is, and that's
and it's a property, like you could dunk that apple in,
and that's fine,
but
it does seem to me that that's like an added thing.
No, it's just
that
the
one
redness.
has to
It's just the way
state.
redness is in the world. It's just one of those things.
It's the way redness is, but then
like you leave that apple long enough, it's not going to be red.
Yeah.
So it's just the redness of apples is such that it could contingently be
right.
green, or the location of apples is such that it could easily be elsewhere. An apple hit my car on the way to the freeway today, and I'm like, where did that apple come from? Like, they move. So I mean, one thing that I think was really interesting here is that I think philosophers get
What,
so
what,
caught up.
it's important though, because when we say that the apple isn't red, that doesn't determine any particular stated color state of the apple, right? It
There's
has
a whole
to,
bunch.
right. There's a whole bunch. So it's not merely in virtue of redness alone that it cannot be red. It's in virtue of the nature
That's
of other
interesting.
colors and of other apples,
Right. So
right? That it can be determinately some other way, which is not red.
right. So I don't, yeah, and I'm not sure that he's committed here to the idea that the apples being red is the truth maker for the idea that the apple could have not been red, because redness is not a necessary property of apples, right? But I don't think it's necessarily the truth maker for the apple could have been purple. You might need for the apple to be purple certain
Yeah.
the apples being red is not the truth maker, I think, for the case that the apple could have been purple. You need maybe some facts about the genetics of apples or the existence of purple paint or something like that, as well as the apple's redness, right?
Right.
So and that's one thing that I think is interesting that I was just about to say, that I think we get so caught up on just getting the basics of mere possibility down that we don't get to the interesting questions of what constrains our possibility talk. I mean, I think Lewis has a bit of an answer. It's distance from our world, which I thought is what shows that Lewis's pluriverse presupposes a kind of realist naturalism. We have to have intuitions about these worlds that aren't ours, how far they are from ours. And I think that those only come from intuitions about our own world and the properties that are in it, right? So I don't think that actually Lewis's world talk does much philosophical work. But so
Nobody
how much
in other worlds.
how much, right? so how do I know if a world where pigs are flying is closer or more distance to this world than a world where, I don't know, iguanas sing the blues? It's intuitions like, well, look at iguanas, look what it takes to sing the blues, look at like kind of cognitive development it would require. It's all this intuitions about the properties of our world and how they connect to each other and how much would have to be different for that to be the way things were. And so I do think it's like this question of, what makes it true that true or false
It's
that
just
humans could avoid climate change devastation? Well, you have to look at humans, the actual ones we have here. It's going to be it's going to be the states of the world here and the nature of the properties that make them what they are.
Yeah.
That's going to determine the truth of something like it's possible that humans will avoid climate change disaster.
It's just not clear to me that some possible that some merely possible green apple, which makes it the case that that apple is not red, presumably in virtue of its being virtue of its being green, that property doesn't exist in the apple as it actually is.
No, that's very good.
The apple is red,
I
and
think
it's not
some green apple somewhere that makes the redness of the apple contingent. It's the green apples that remind us that the redness of the apple is a contingent property of the apple. But it's just the redness being contingent that I think is important for Armstrong, right? Like,
yeah, if this is the case, there is an argument to be made here. What it leaves out is a theory, is a background theory of possibility, contingency, of modality generally,
right,
which he is presupposing, which accounts for them in a certain sort of way. And of course, he does have a couple of books about it. So, I mean, it may just be that I don't quite entirely share his view about it. But it's not, or if you take the statement to be, there is one apple on the table, but if that statement is contingent, because it's possible that there was more than one apple, right? Which would mean that apple alone, it's not obvious that apple alone can make it true.
I think that apple
that there might have been two apples.
Don't forget the table in that, right? It's the state of that apple being on the table, and one of the features of that apple being on the table is there's room for more apples.
Yes, but but the other apples would have also played a role in making that statement true. You know, yes, there has to
Right,
have
if
been
there
enough
was-
room on the
if-
table
right, if-
for the other apple, but
right,
the other apple would have to play some role in making
if
it true
if apples
that there
were,
is not only one apple.
right, if apples
right?
were such an entity that if you put one
Yeah.
in a universe, no other apples could exist, but that one apple, they were like, they took up a universe, then
I'm not
then it
saying
would
that
not be a
I'm not-
contingency that there's one apple on the table.
this is why I'm trying. This is why I say I think I'm still somewhat sympathetic to the rest all approach, because I don't want to deny these relationships of necessity and possibility and supervenience. I'm simply trying to say that it's in virtue of that other apple that the statement that it's possible that there's more than one apple would be true. It isn't the actual single apple and table alone which is sufficient.
I guess,
Right?
I mean,
You know,
but
it misses there's a relevance failure
Right.
there.
you
There
could-
you know, like
right,
it-
you could be, I mean, I thought about that too, because there's like, the guy who does history of philosophy without any gaps is always talking
yeah.
about his unborn sister, right? Like his sister that never had, that parents never had,
Sure.
'cause he just has a one brother,
Who, by the way,
a twin
happens
brother.
to be a giraffe.
Right? Yes, who happens to be a giraffe, right? And he's always talking about this sister, right? So what's the truth? The truth maker for it's possible that I could have a sister is presumably the truth maker for I don't have a sister, which is probably some complicated set of affairs involving the lifespan of his parents or something like that, right? So yeah, it is, you know, what else does that make true is kind of an interesting question. And I mean, I share your, like I said at the beginning, I shared your concerns that this is circular, right? That contingency is
Yes.
going to somehow appeal to possibility. But I do think that the you know, the focus is to sort of make contingency, you know, not a special property, but contingency talk about real things. And so if at the end of the day, what we need to do to get there could have been two apples on the table is the truth maker for there is one apple on the table and another actual apple in the world, then you're still not needing to go beyond, you know, a pretty natural account of truth makers.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I
my worry
raise
is
another
essentially
problem?
okay, yeah, sure.
I want to raise another problem in case, but go back if you think there's something to be resolved that you can resolve. But
Well, can I
even
just
if
say,
we-
because he does
go
have
ahead.
the account of he does have the account of unicorns, right? Like you can have a truth maker for claims about unicorns, presumably being horses and horns, right? You know, he talks about combinations that you
Right.
can maybe.
Exactly.
So yeah, so we could have a truth maker for there could be two apples on the table, which is the situation of there being one apple on the table and another apple anywhere.
I was
So
just
it has
going to say
multiple
this contingency point for trying to resolve all mere possibilities is unfair to what's actually stated here, because he brings in combinatorials to account for there could have been more than one apple. The part we cover right here is just for the negation of existence claims, or the possibility of the negation of the truth bearer, you know, relation with the truth maker. But in order to do things like there could have been more than one apple, you're like exactly what Karen just said. You're going to need the presence of the one apple, or the one apple is one truth maker, and the existence of another apple anywhere in the world would then make it true the possibility that there could have been more.
or even the resources for
Well, there may
making
not
an
be any
apple.
other apples in the actual world, but that
It-
shouldn't
it- or,
necessarily be a
you know,
problem.
the
I mean,
resources
there might
for
have been
making
more
another
than there
apple,
are.
right?
Well, no,
Yeah,
it would fail
right.
to be a mere possibility. It has to be a combination of actual.
Yeah,
world.
that's why I was saying that the argument does, in a way, as a background, presuppose this entire account of modality.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to say, Rodrigo?
Oh, just that there could be more apples in there. All right, no, but apart from that, I wanted to explore. So if we grant my way of adding to this argument in order to get two from one, namely that there are no necessary beings, that at best gives us truth makers for well, statements of the form 5. It is possible that not be, but it doesn't tell us what to do with the positive claims. It is possible that P, since that would require a truth maker for a negative contingent truth. And I don't know that he addresses that. Maybe he does.
Yeah, I think he does.
Or is that the aliens?
Well, there's there's comments about false makers.
Well, but he's a maximalist. He wants truth makers, not just false makers.
But also he's like the P that he's talking about here is it is possible that pigs fly. So what the contingency that he has in mind here is the contingency of pigs not flying. So it is a negative one that we're supposed to be looking at here.
Fair
right?
enough,
So
but in
it's
that
kind of
case, I'm
built
not
into the
sure.
system.
Fair enough, but in that case, I'm not sure what the truth maker for pigs not flying is. I mean, there aren't any.
It's all of the pigs.
Well, yes, but
not,
how does
not
I mean,
flying.
the pigs are not the problem. It's
right?
The pigs aren't the problem. It's them not flying, because not flying isn't some portion of the world. Flying is, but not flying isn't.
Yeah. So if the world is devoid of flying pigs, then that's so the idea is that it's somehow like an absence or something. It's the
Absences are not truth
that
makers, barring some treatment of. Well, sure, of course. I mean, I do too, but that's because
my glass is empty.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do too. I just don't think that an empiricist, naturalist, ontologically conservative account of truth makers will ever tell us how.
So my glass is empty requires a different world where it's full to be true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the blank stare is not an argument, but it has been very effective.
I just don't understand how that helps.
Yes, you're right. You don't.
Still, I mean,
but that's not an argument.
Even when my glass is full, there's going to be the worlds where it's full. So how does that make my glass is empty any truer? The fact that there's worlds where it's full, that's going to be true when it's full too. So I don't.
Well,
so you're going to have some claim. So you're going to have to answer that when some saying, well, your world now is further away from those full glass worlds than it would be if your glass is full. And I'm going to ask, what does that mean? And then I'm going to have to be like, well, when you put water in it, that pulls it further away from those worlds. So I'm like, well, it's all about whether or not there's water in it. And that's a this world phenomenon.
Yeah, like the truth of whether the glass is full or not is certainly entirely about this world. But we're not talking about truths. We're talking about truth makers. The truth makers are not the truths, and the truth makers might not be at the world at which the truths that they make true are, which is why they are negatives.
Right. Well, as I think the truth maker for my glass is not full is right here in my hand.
Well, of course, but there's nothing there. That's the problem.
But that's because you can easily talk about in an empirical way things that aren't there.
It's
the last cookie in the jar was eating yesterday.
I agree that we can easily do it, and I agree that empiricists do it. I disagree that they are being empiricists when they do it with ease.
Okay.
Because they simply don't have any experience of emptiness. There's nothing to experience there. No thing anyway. There's propositional content, but propositional content is precisely the issue, right? Yeah, you did nothing. That's the point.
I didn't just experience emptiness.
No.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. I don't want to experience the emptiness.
I mean, you did.
I think you're doing me a favor, Rodrigo.
I mean, you did propositionally.
I find it comforting.
There's a propositional content to an experience, such that you can say, I experience. You can experience that the glass is empty. That you do, yes. But we also talk about the objects, well, let's say the truth makers of the contents of our experience, and that's not the same thing. So we keep flipping back and forth between the truths and the truth makers to motivate, I think, these equivocations. But when we're clear about the truths as against the truth makers, it's not so clear what worlds we're speaking of and whether we're cryptically and without admission using modal language without account, without empiricist and naturalist account. Now, I'm going to be the last to say that it doesn't make sense to speak modally. I'm just observing that only some accounts can make sense of the fact that it makes sense. Aliens, anyone? Apples are easy. How about the aliens? He says he's a one world chauvinist. Properties as well as particulars can only be mere possibilities. Okay, well, let's see what the one world chauvinist can do. Josh, I know you're a one world chauvinist. Doesn't mean you like One Direction though, right?
No, definitely does not mean that. Yeah, this is where we get to the combinatorial constructs, which I rather liked. I was kind of surprised he didn't use this more for other possibilities.
Oh, it's just because he thinks that's the easy part. He's trying to deal with the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So the aliens are the things that are not
Merely possible.
possible chimeras, possible combinations.
Right.
Right.
It would be what's omitted from the class of all actual properties and complexes of combinatorial complexes of those properties.
So as the one world chauvinist, the example that bothered me were the extremely heavy elements that we can possibly create in laboratories, and we have, and we'll probably go on to do. Are those aliens?
No,
or were they all possible?
No, those aren't aliens. Aliens is like a totally different account of matter that isn't the periodic table, is invalid, well, is inconsistent with any of physical theory, true, not just proposed. And
well, no, they have to be constructed from properties that don't exist, right?
Precisely. Well, no, they are well, I mean, I'm talking about alien properties. The alien objects are, of course, just the instantiations of those alien properties.
Right.
The point is just that whatever those properties are, no amount of actual science will.
Well, Josh, there are elements that were alien to our history, but the issue of there being elements which are alien to our world is something stronger.
No, they can have an atomic structure so heavy that they have not ever existed in our world.
No, it's that they could not. They could not without having different laws of nature.
Then they weren't possible if they could not, right?
They're not.
You're saying the alien properties could not. No conditions could have been under which they would be instantiated or realized.
Well, I mean, there is one set of conditions, namely that the laws are different and that we have different properties. But you have to go that deep.
But I mean, this is what I'm getting at. So if the universe is such that the conditions will never obtain, such that a heavy element,
contingent reasons or necessary reasons,
or will never or can never, right? That's the problem.
Well, no, that's right. Yeah, right.
It's kind of.
It has to be can never.
I mean that
can never.
That's. I mean, that's
so for example, there cannot be a uranium atom the size of a galaxy, right? Or molecule, excuse me, whatever, the size of a galaxy, according to the laws as we understand them, right? So is there an alien, uranium atom or molecule like that, or is it also nonsense to speak of such things?
There are also no spheres of solid gold with the diameter of the solar system.
Yeah,
there could be, but there aren't. So that's not an alien property.
Well, it's interesting because he throws in the notion of alien particulars. So there could be, and I think Adamson's sister might be one, but so that there are there are maybe properties that exist because that are not alien, because they can themselves be thought of as combinations of properties that actually exist. But if they lack instantiation, then a particular that had those properties would be an alien particular, even if they're not alien properties, because that combination is, I mean, he says that's the reason he refers to an alien particular on an example of an alien particular on 17 as a duck in this room, right? Ducks aren't that weird. So why would a duck in this room be an alien particular? It's because it's not, when he's talking about the duck in the room, he's not talking about an actual duck or a duck made up of parts of an actual duck or combination of actual duck parts. So that's kind of a weird thing that he throws in there. As the
So
discussion of the alien particular.
yeah, so my reading of this is that even if a property were possible, if it doesn't exist actually, then whatever could be constructed from that property would be an alien particular, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at, that bothered me. So anything that would follow from a heavy element that has never come into existence, though is itself possible, it would then seem that that object is alien, and then
Well, isn't it combinatorial?
no,
It just
But-
requires the different combinations of the
Right.
things in our
But
universe.
not qua particular.
right?
What? Sorry.
Not particular, right?
Because he says the question of,
Well,
is it possible for there to be a duck in this room?
Is the
And
particular-
by
is the-
possible, I
is-
mean not any actual duck, right?
Right.
But just a new duck, and not a duck made of parts of other real ducks, but a brand new duck. Is it possible that there could suddenly be a brand new duck in this room? And he calls that an alien.
well,
particular.
actually, this is why these things are so frustratingly sensitive. You know, I hear random kooky things from pop scientists who say stuff like, technically there is an astronomically small possibility that a duck spontaneously,
Right.
coalesces
So
in front
okay,
of me.
Yeah.
And
so,
if that is the case, if the laws really are that way, then that wouldn't be alien.
well,
It would just be
might,
unusual.
That might be what he
Right.
ultimately says
So
in the end, is something like, if it's within the realm of the laws of science and possibility, then it's not really alien. I don't need a special account for them. But he kind of introduces it as, doesn't it? So okay, it's one thing to say, look, the bear is on the mat is the truth maker for the bear is not on the mat, because bears and mats are separable. But it's, if you're talking about what's the truth maker for, there could be a completely novel, never existed before duck in this room in 2 seconds, then it can't be the other ducks. I guess it could be something like the size of the room, right? You can fit a duck in it, something like that, right? But so maybe that's why he thinks it's an alien particular, because it seems like there might be you might need to have another possible world where you could put this duck waiting to be in your room, something like that. So that's why I think but yeah, so I do think I agree with Josh that this is a weird thing to throw in these alien particulars, but maybe we can try and figure out what he says to solve this problem anyway.
So there are the alien properties and the alien particulars, right? So how does he deal with them? On his account, he ends up treating the alien properties like squaring the circle, right? Is that right?
I think what he kind of does is,
Yeah, which is, as he says, which is thinkable, but in fact impossible. So in other words, the alien things are just impossibilities.
No, he doesn't go quite that far, right? Because he does think that
No, yeah, you're right.
He
Okay,
says,
what does he say?
He says, this is where the duck comes in, right? He says, so one suggestion about properties in particular that I embraced for a while is that although the concept of an alien property is thinkable, it's not really a genuine possibility. An alien property on this view is like squaring the circle, which is thinkable, but in fact impossible. But if, like me, you think of properties as contingent entities and uninstantiated properties as non-existent, right? So the in this room is an uninstantiated property, therefore non-existent on his view. Such an a priori limitation of the possible properties can hardly be maintained. So that idea had to be discarded. The situation is still worth with alien particulars. Surely there might be alien particulars, a duck in this room now say, which are not identical partly or wholly with any actual particular. But then he says, it seems though that the treatment already given of truth makers for truths of mere possibility will serve us in dealing with the apparent modal truth that there might have been aliens. And then he starts by doing it, considering it with properties. And I think the general idea is, okay, non-instantiated properties don't exist. So if there's nobody on the earth with an Apple Pencil on their head right now, that property does not exist right now, right? But what does it mean to say that there could be a person with an Apple Pencil on their head, right? And that's a possibility, right? Well, so I guess what he says is, if you make a list of all the properties in the world, one big grocery list of properties, and that list is contingently a matter of contingency, the list that it is, then that list, given the article on the argument on page 4, is going to make it possible that there are alien properties. Just like the fact that there's the fact that the bear is on the mat and its contingent nature of that situation is what makes it possible that the bear is not on the mat. If the list of all the properties in the world is contingent, and it does seem to be, because as Joshua just described, that property is back in existence, right? So we can change that list like this. So it does seem contingent that the list of properties is the list that it is. So yeah, but that seems like a really, I mean, maybe this is why impossible properties becomes interesting, right? Because is there any constraint on what properties are possible or not possible by this metric, right?
Yeah, it was really unclear to me exactly how he settles the alien situation. If he yeah, I mean, what does he try to say is the truth maker for them in the end? Or is there, or are they all
the truth maker for
or are they false?
In the end, after he acknowledges that, well, first of all, after making an effort to deal with the problem using the combinatorial conception of modality, he says, it would seem that the subclass of the non-existent but combinatorially accessible properties is necessitated by the actual real properties, for it is because of the intrinsic nature of the actual properties that they are combinable or uncombinable in the forming of merely possible properties or particulars. The combinatorially accessible properties supervene. So the truth maker for the modally mixed class of actual properties plus the merely possible properties, but excluding the alien possible properties, is the conjunction of the actual properties plus whatever makes it true that they are all the actual properties. That's the answer.
Well, it goes on to say, then you imply to get to the alien properties, you have to use the entailment principle again, right? And if the entailment principle applies here, and why should it not? That truth maker is also the truth maker for the possibility of extra properties.
Yeah, the alien thing comes right at the end, and that was a little bit unclear to me. So it's that when you apply the entailment principle to the actual properties, you just get the alien ones, and all of the actual ones are truth makers for the alien possibilities,
providing that that list is a contingent one.
Right.
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 So think about this. I just got back from vacation and we went to a lot of restaurants that were full and there was no table for us, right? So if we go to a restaurant and they say, oh, there's room to seat you now. What makes that true is presumably the number of, the actual number of people in the restaurant and the fact that there's room for more, right? Like it's a contingent matter that it's, that there's this much people and that, or no, or let's say we'll seat you in 45 minutes. Right now there's a list of people and there's a list of tables and they match so that there's no room for us, but that's a contingent matter. And in 45 minutes, there'll be less people, right? So there'll be room for us. So if you take all the properties in the world and then ask, is it necessary that that's the list of all the properties that there are? And for whatever this mysterious that we've all really talked about thing that contingency is, if the answer is no, it's not necessary that that's the list, then it's possible that there's things not on the list.
So in other words, if the list is not total.
Yeah, if there's no necessity constraining the list to be what it is, then it's possible that it's something else. So,
That's it.
right.
Yeah.
So
This is the same argument as the earlier one. Except it's applied to the list of properties as opposed to
exactly.
applying.
It's the exact same argument. Yes.
So it depends
Each
on
section,
the non-necessity of the
Yes.
list of properties, of the actual list of
Right.
properties.
Right.
So if
Plus
all of
the
the properties that
combination
there are, the
Architect.
fact that they are all of the ones that they are, the fact that
What does
they are all the ones that actually are is itself contingent. Yeah.
There could have been.
Well,
it doesn't make true any
Well,
particular-
actually,
any,
no.
any,
Well-
any given
Well,
alien property, only that there are alien
no.
properties.
Well, wait, is that quite right though? Because I mean, it could just be that all of those properties disappear, not that there is an additional alien.
Right.
So like the
yeah,
contingency
so I
of the
guess
list isn't really quite sufficient.
right.
Because
No,
the
no,
contingency of the
it's-
list could just be that there are fewer properties in some
Well-
other world.
I thought
Well-
that's why he brings in the ontology of allness. It's not just those particular ones, but that it's
that the-
the allness that the allness is itself contingent. It follows that there could have been more or others, right?
right.
So that's a separate.
So is he hypostasizing allness? Like, is allness a property? I mean,
This is just modality on the sly. I mean,
Well, look, that he does.
This line.
I mean, he does think that sometimes there will be constraints on this, like when he talks about whether or not there has to be at least one contingent being is a necessary truth or not, right? And so
well, look, I mean, if you there's you know there's all there
right.
there are all of
So what has to be the case is that is it a contingent matter that there are this many properties or less, right? That would get around it. You specify that or less. And if that is a contingent matter, then there must be a possibility that there's more, right? I'm going to bring one back into existence. No, it's not.
yeah, sure. Let's say, okay, that's a more
Right.
That's a slightly. I mean, I don't think he quite
He talks
says
something
it
about
that
it
way,
being-
but that's a better way, I think, of putting
He-
it. Right? It's
he-
like
he-
if the number of properties there are, well, actually, I mean, if there's infinite, that's not a good example either. though,
Right.
Because
He said he's talking at the bottom of 17. Maybe this is why he puts this
that
language.
only works if there's finite.
This is where I think on the bottom of sub 17, now I understand why he puts it this way. What then of the modal truth that it is possible, merely possible, that what is in fact the class of all properties is a mere subclass of the class of all properties, right? So, right, how is this passive?
But why is he presuming that it's true? I mean, I guess my point is,
So that's why I think when you,
why doesn't he just reject aliens? I mean, he seems to be going through a
he
lot of
thinks it's
pains
just as true.
to establish a truth maker, but given his combinatorialism, it's not obvious that he should.
Well, I think
care to.
I think he just thinks it is true that Peter
This is very interesting. I mean, this is
could have had a sister. but that sister doesn't have to be a combination of any particular sperm or an egg or anything like that, right? That there could be something about this world that makes it true that
Well,
Peter Adams
presumably it
had a
has to be a
sister.
sperm of his father, an egg of his mother. I mean,
Well, but
otherwise it wouldn't
not
be
a
a sister.
particular one, not a particular one, right? It's not a
That's
combination
just the
of any particular.
disjunctive issue. There are many possible sisters is the problem, right?
Well, not if you're, but if you want to be a naturalist about this, if you're Armstrong, you're not going to fill possible worlds with possible combinations of sperms and eggs, right? So yeah, so it's
No, it's the actual world that over time has many sperms and many eggs that could be combined to make a sister.
well, you can
So I don't
you can
think
make
he
a
needs-
Franken duck out of duck parts, but when he makes that comment about the duck, that's not that, you know, the possible duck in this room, that's not any existing actual duck or a combination of duck parts from an actual duck, right? It's not a Franken duck that we put together with duck bits, but just a brand new duck that could be in this room, right? So yeah, so
Well, actually, he says something stronger because he wants to make the point about an alien particular duck. He says not identical, partly or wholly with any particular, not just any duck, but not identical with anything in particular.
Right. That's what I think Adams' sister is going to turn out to be. But
so
yeah.
So there's not just my point is that there are combinatorial sisters, and then there's the question of alien sisters.
Right.
So okay, so
but
there's
we
still
must
the question
remember
of,
that Adam's sister is a giraffe, so that's going to put a lot of burden on the sperm and the egg, right?
That's true. I'm just saying, because he has already combinatorial sisters, I don't know why he cares to have alien sisters.
Right.
You know, like it's not this aspect of the view. It's not clear to me. The only defense he says is that if like me, you think that properties as contingent entities and uninstantiated properties is non-existent, such a priori limitation on the possible properties can hardly be maintained. But that just seems to me to be wrong, because the contingency of properties which are actual may simply be grounded in the fact that any of the actual properties might not have been instantiated, but that doesn't require there to be any additional alien properties. Like all of the properties can be contingent entities. All of the actual properties, perhaps those are the only properties that there are. They could still be contingent in the sense that any one of them might not have been instantiated.
Right.
So what he gives as a reason there for rejecting the treating alien properties like the squaring the circle, I don't think that's a good reason.
Right. No, it's definitely what Joshua is saying, is that you're not thinking about whether or not each of the properties is contingent as much as whether or not the sum total of properties is whether it's a contingent matter, that the sum total of properties could be no higher. Right. Like so that list, that grocery list, that God says no more properties written down, right? You might take things off as they become non-existent, but nothing more added. And he thinks that no, that list is a contingent matter. So then there could be alien possibilities, but it's that list and its contingency that makes that possibility real. There's room in the universe for more twists and turns, right? So
he just has some sort of intuition that if you draw up a list of all the actual properties, somehow there could be something added.
Right, like if you
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what supports that, but I think that he just has that.
If you think of very early in the universe,
thought.
right? If you think in the very early in the universe where there's like only one type of particle and doing one type of thing, and you make a list of all the properties in the universe, it was a contingent matter that was the sum total of properties in the universe. And we know that because we have a lot more different kinds of particles and a lot more different kinds of things going on.
No, but I think that's a mistake.
For him,
it was a for all we know contingency. It may not, right?
Like
the list as it is at any given time might be correct.
Right, at that
it might
time,
be correct,
but the
and there may not.
The question is
well,
that
it wasn't
all
correct
that's possible,
at the time. Right? But my point is that we were wrong.
No one
if we
was
had
there.
Been right.
No one was there. So it's just a question of like, let's just consider the universe.
Yeah.
Not make it an epistemic thing, right? Just make
no, you're talking about lists that people draw up.
No.
Lists that people draw up.
Let's just say it's
or do you mean the actual things?
It's the reality of what properties were there. Because
so the reality of properties at a time is different from the realities of properties in the world as a whole, across all times, or omnitemporally, as he says, right? When you consider all of the properties omnitemporally, it's not obvious that one way or the other, I would say it's not obvious that there should be aliens.
Well, if
I don't
if
know.
you make so you're saying that aliens are you have to
We
say
get an
are
intuition for the
omnitemporally.
epistemically for the possibility of them because we've been wrong in the past. But that doesn't mean that we're not perfectly correct now,
No,
and
no,
that
no,
there
I don't
aren't any
think.
of their properties even possibly.
Okay, well, forget
Right. So
omnitemporally. Just talk about a
Yeah.
temporal list of properties, right?
Of course, temporally, this is correct.
What properties were there when the Big Bang
Yeah.
happened? And are there more properties now? And
Sure.
non-instantiated properties don't
Yes.
exist on his view. So the list is longer now, right? There's more things.
There are more properties
more
today than there
properties
were
now that, right? So
billion years ago.
that gives you
Yeah.
an idea of what it could mean for a list to be contingent, a list of properties to be
Sure.
contingent, right?
Well,
the
not just a list,
properties
but the actual
exist.
properties at a time. Yeah. The
Right.
actual properties at a
The
time
sum,
might grow
the
or shrink.
mereological sum of properties could be contingent matter, right? Because it can grow.
Sure.
So
Sure.
now there are more properties, and so it's a contingent matter how many properties there are in our universe temporally.
Yes, if we're building the temporality into contingency,
Right.
then that's true.
Now
if,
just imagine that
but if we
there's
speak tenselessly, then it's not true.
right. I didn't see anything here about tenselessness. Right.
Well, yeah. Well, or about tense. I mean,
I did.
know.
He talks about speaking omnitemporally.
Actually, that's right.
Where's
That's
that?
why I used that word, because I'd never seen that word before, but he used it. I usually say like eternally or
Right.
atemporal or something, but he said omni
Was that in
temporally.
terms of like?
Actually, that was just in the previous
contingent-
paragraph. It's on 17, the middle paragraph in parentheses. Consider properties in particular. There is an actually existing entity. I am taking existence omnitemporally. That is the totality of properties, all of them instantiated according to me.
Okay.
Instantiated across many different times.
Right.
Right. And you can imagine this totality as reported in a list, perhaps an infinite one, yielding a true proposition.
Okay.
So what is the truth maker for the truth that a certain class of properties is the class of all the properties? And so the first obvious conjecture, right, is the mereological sum of all those properties. He says, I cannot agree with this because I am also committed to truth makers necessitating their truths. And it seems clear that there might have been more properties, quote unquote, on the list, and so in the class. It just seems clear. I think this is what Rodrigo was saying. This is the naturalism. This is the wanting all to be contingent through and through and on the whole that he means to try to preserve. But he doesn't, he just says it's clear. And it's not, I guess it's not clear to me, but I'm not saying it's wrong, but the defense of it is, there's no, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's, I think, the bottom of of where he sort of bottoms out and doesn't, say more, but might say more in some other paper or book.
Right.
But it is that intuition that on the whole, everything, all is contingent.
Karen, I have a question for you and for Kenny as well.
Yeah.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
Are we closer to the truth?
So I'm not sure, but I do
Section 4.
remember. But I
have my good friend Sean
paper
Carroll,
on that
or is it
was
Roger Penrose, or who am I interviewing this week?
Oh God. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I think that's section 4.
Exactly.
That is section 4. Yeah. I will say that I think that Nozick's essay on that, from what I recall of it, was the most brilliant thing I've ever read on that question.
I agree, but it was about explanation, not about modality.
Yes, that's true. Well, yeah. Yeah.
And to be fair, that is what the question asks about, which is why Armstrong doesn't put it the way I did. He says, is it possible for there to be nothing else?
That's true. Yeah, right. The empty universe.
Lawrence Krauss thinks so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and he later at the bottom of the first paragraph in that section, he reemphasizes this thing I was just going on about, the all this contingent thing. He says, if it is false, I don't remember what he was talking about, then this can only be because the world as a whole is a necessary being. Quotes, the hideous hypothesis of the atheist Spinoza, end quote, as Hume so delightfully put it.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of thing that he means to avoid.
Yeah, that's what he means by naturalism. He means
Yeah.
to avoid necessary
The world as a
beings to
whole
be
is a necessary being.
experienced. Well, any necessary beings. For the Humean
Yeah, even the
reason that
world as a whole.
you
Yeah.
can't experience necessity.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that must be the reason he probably holds at some level. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this holds reality hostage to epistemology, a mistake Armstrong should not make.
Well, I think that's unfair. I mean, I think we experience things close to necessity all the time, and so that's why we were tempted to say things like there are maybe numbers that are necessary, but yeah, he just doesn't think that, you know, some things like, given our experience, that things like properties are necessary. Maybe with the, you know, it might be necessary that there has to be something, some one contingent being. It could take turns existing.
Well, Armstrong doesn't seem to think so. He says a universe empty of contingent beings appears to be a possibility.
Right, but he's not sure, because he says that it might be the case that the sentence
I don't understand how he can have a real
there
problem
is
with this
one
and yet be giving the
contingent
kinds
being.
of arguments that he was giving earlier. I mean, presumably the empty universe is just that contingent possibility, which is the possibility of which is made true by the contingency of all of the actually existing things. Had none of them been there, then, you know, I mean, like with the entailment principle as he constructs it, I don't know why that shouldn't just be delivered straight out.
It's because of truthmaker maximalism, because you need something to make there's nothing true.
No, but you do have something, all of the things in the actual world.
But that's all there is here. So
yeah,
if the universe is
it's empty, more than you need.
But if the universe is empty,
but it's still sufficient.
Then, oh, okay. So you're saying that,
right?
Because,
in the same way that the one apple on the table is sufficient for taking it away, because its being there is contingent. We could take all of this away, right? I mean, I don't know why it's not the same entailment argument. Very straightforwardly, but just apply to the contingency of being of all things.
Well, you might have something like this follow, that the possibility that there could be an empty universe is there until the very last thing, but then once you take that away, there's no truth maker for the emptiness of the universe. So it's always.
But the truth makers are never. See, this is the thing. The truth makers, even of the absences, are the things that are actual.
Yes,
like if there's only one apple on the table, it's still that same single apple that makes it possible that it isn't there. Right.
But
according to him,
right. So, but
you know, I mean, it's contingent nature.
So you need something to make the possibility of nothing there. So you always have them, because you always have something. But it's the null
combination of all things.
Think about that combination. Think about that universe that has that one apple left. That's it. You take that apple out. As long as that apple is there, the possibility of an empty universe is there, because the apple is the truth maker for that. But once that apple's gone, it cannot be true that there's an empty universe, because there's nothing to make. There's no truth makers left to make it true. So it's a possibility.
I don't.
So that's why I think he believes that.
So this is.
As long.
This is interesting. This is, yeah. Well, I don't understand why the same argument doesn't work with the case of a single apple on the table. When you take it away, there's nothing left to make it true that there's no apple there. But I thought he said that it was the apple that made it true, that it's possible that it isn't there. I mean, it's no, I don't think it's any different.
The truth of there is no apple on the table is the table. I don't think it's the apples of the world.
Forget the table, just that there is an apple there, like I don't understand,
So I think the truth maker for there is no apple right there is there.
Or just that apple doesn't exist. Let me name it Bob. Bob doesn't exist. There's a possibility
that Bob doesn't exist.
Yeah, right. I mean, when you strip it down like that, he does still want to countenance these contingencies as being made true by the actual thing, and the possibilities that those things aren't there as being made true by the actual thing that is there, in fact, there. So I don't see why he shouldn't extend that to everything. But
I just think because there's no truth maker in an empty universe. It can't be true. It can never be true that there is that the universe is empty. But as soon as you have one thing, that thing can make the emptiness of the universe a possibility. So it's weird.
Shall we move to necessary truths?
Yeah.
I found this the most interesting part of the paper. I think it's worth reading out the first couple of paragraphs just to remind us. Not all truths of possibility are truths of mere possibility. What is actual is also possible. But truth makers for contingent truths will automatically be truth makers for their possibility. They will not be minimal truth makers. What is necessary is also possible, but we can subsume that inquiry under the question of truth makers for necessary truths, which is our present business. What I now want to argue is that necessary truths, insofar as they are necessary, give us no information about the existence of anything at all. They are concerned with possibilities alone. The corollary is that the rational sciences of mathematics and logic, where the bulk of the interesting necessary truths are to be found, are concerned not with the existence, but only with the possible existence. The sphere of necessity, and so the sphere of the rational sciences, is wider than the sphere of the actual. It is the sphere of the possible. So this leads to possibilism about math. And I have two questions about this. One is, what about the logical truths that aren't mathematical truths? And second, what about the mathematical truths that are purely generalizations that don't name any objects in particular? How are they still about possibility, or about possible objects, I think it must be said.
What's an example of a non-mathematical logical truth that doesn't name any particular?
Yeah, everything, all primes are numbers.
I see. Right.
But don't read that as the set of all primes has a property. Instead, read that as for all x, if x is a prime, then x is a number. It's actually a quantification over everything, not just of primes, not just of numbers, not just of abstract objects. So in what sense are we really talking about in particular possibilities?
Wasn't it saying that there's no possibility of something being a prime and not being a number?
Yes, of course. But
And
that's a
then
necessity. It's not possible.
Start to
It's a
give
necessity.
right. So that's about possibilities.
No.
Well,
He's saying that necessity is not what that the necessary truths are about possibilities, not about okay. It's about, remember, what we're relating is propositions to non-propositional objects. So to observe that a necessary universal generalization is about what's not possible is of course true, but it remains on the side of the propositional. He's wanting to identify the objects that might be the truth makers and suggesting that rather than there having to be existing objects, there need be only possibly existing objects. But for a universal generalization, no objects need
yeah, I mean, because
possibly exist for it to be true.
if it's a vacuously true claim.
No, even no.
Is that what
My
you
point is
mean?
no. My point is that okay. If for all x, if x is a prime, x is a number, that's true. Here's another one. For all x, if x is a prime and not a number, then it is a number. That's also true. Because the antecedent is always false, and the material conditional is always true when the antecedent is false.
Yeah.
So it's just, here you're not, in the second example, you're not talking about any possible existences, but it's also a necessary truth. So what's the truth maker in that case?
It seems like the treatment he would provide would be the same as the analyticity section. So he's going to on the meanings of terms as being the truth makers, right? So it may be in your example, you have something like the internal relations that he uses for necessity, but then additionally, it's going to depend on the meanings of things like, primes or whatever the conditions are being prime that then make it true, that it is true of whatever you're quantifying over, that particular thing is is true, right? So I think you're going to have two different applications of what he provides here in order to get the truthfulness of those statements. So you're not looking for objects, but the meanings of the terms as the truth makers for the particular logical truth.
But I am looking for objects. I'm looking for truth makers, even if they are the meanings. But then I don't want to admit that a truth of number theory is about meanings. I still want it to be about numbers. And
but
then
numbers
we
are
solve the problem. And then we solve the problem.
I think what Armstrong has to say is something like, I think what he has to say is something like that primeness is a certain kind of structure, a possible structure in the world, and that it's true of that possible, necessarily true of that possible structure, that it's always a substructure of what we call number. And he has to give some theory of what that means. He's going to have to cash that out a bit.
Yeah,
but he's going to try to.
Yeah.
But that's how he's going to try to.
But what about the
analyze that
mathematical logical truths?
Like
the theorems of S5.
Sure, yeah. Or just, for all x is identical to itself. It's like
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think he just thinks that those are, I guess there's a question as to why those things are well, I'm not sure what he means by, I mean, I guess there's a question as to what he means by possibilities, but like, if presumably that, that's something, a statement like that applies to everything. It applies to all empirical objects, all structures, all everything, right? And, everything is identical to itself seems to apply to literally everything. So I guess he just wants to say that it's a necessary truth about all possible things.
And
Yeah,
I think-
actually,
I mean,
and all
Yeah.
the
that-
things are all possible things,
yeah, that one seems
or
easy.
something like that.
Like everything is
Um,
identical for itself. The truth maker for that could be everything.
Because what he
It doesn't
really
have be
cares to
something
try
else.
to do in this section is to make sure that he doesn't introduce any necessary beings.
Right.
Right? He's
No, actually, I
just
think this
trying.
just is,
He's trying. Yeah.
this just is structuralism, I think, mathematical structuralism. I haven't studied
Yeah,
I
you
think-
might be,
yeah,
you
I
might be
think- I
right.
think so,
beyond
yeah.
20 odd pages, but this is consistent with it. He calls it possibilism, but that
I
might
think
just
so.
be because he's coming at it from a different place. But it sounds like it's the same thing. And if that's the case, then
Yeah.
I'm very sympathetic to this idea. It's not egregiously empirical because, like he says, even if the universe is finite, it is only contingently finite, right?
Right.
So,
Sure.
and besides, you can get an infinity of objects from a single object just by way of some function, using that object as a root. So I'm satisfied with this, but it does have the artifact. It does have the consequence that the truth maker of any of these necessary truths, or at least of the mathematical truths, will make all the others true as well. And that violates intuitions about relevance, which he doesn't address, I don't think. And frankly, I don't myself have. I don't worry about that. I'm perfectly happy to say that all the mathematical truths have a single truth maker.
Well, I think he might try and wiggle out of that with his interesting distinction between reference and truth makers, right? So it could be that the there's some way in which, since any object can be part of a 7 or part of a 5, then any object can function as part of one of these structures that makes 7 plus 5, 12 or whatever. But when we're talking about the truth maker for 7 plus 5, we're talking about the meanings of the worlds and the structures of which they are referring to that can be variously instantiated. And we're not actually talking about everything in the world that could be part of that structure. So just like when we're talking about bachelors, we're talking about actual human beings, but when we're talking about all bachelors being unmarried, the truth maker for that is meanings. Meanings are not bachelors, right? So we're not there's a difference between the truth maker for that and the reference of that proposition.
So he really does
all
say
bachelors are all bachelors are unmarried men refers to a bunch of people, but the truth maker for that is meanings in a language.
Does he say that?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's later though.
that's later.
That's
But-
not.
but
for
I
the
think he
math,
could-
but for
But
the,
I think
for
he could do the same thing so that it
Right.
doesn't end up that there's the same truth maker for every mathematical statement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
very unfortunate.
I don't.
I can't sign up for that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what he wants to do though. I mean, does he say anything about there being only one truth maker for all mathematical truths? I don't remember if he. I don't think he does address that issue.
By the way, I take it back. You can have it both ways in a way. You could say there is a truth maker that by real entailment makes all the mathematical truths true, but more complex mathematical truths would not. You could say something about the more complex mathematical truths having more complex minimal truth makers that are all the same by real entailment entailed by the simplest truth maker. I don't know if that's going to work. What I have in mind is that 1 + 1 = 2, for instance, if you have a set theoretic reduction could be made true by the empty set and functions on the empty set, namely the various construction functions. So you can get the 1, you can get the 2, and all the rest. But in some sense, all of those constructed sets are entailed by the root empty set by stipulation. So that might be to have it both, might be a way to have it
Right.
both ways.
And I mean, I guess since he does make a distinction between reference and truth makers, and presumably through between meanings and truth makers, right? Because but there's this interesting claim that, you know, meanings can function as truth makers, but they could also not function as truth makers, presumably. So, yeah, I think there's it could be that frequently a truth maker is an incredibly large, all-inclusive thing, such that it's the same truth maker for unicorns don't exist as griffins don't exist, and that's not a problem because it's not like truth maker accounts for sense or something like that, or meaning. Right, truth maker has its own role to play.
It could be that there are norms, semantic norms that deliver the analytic or the conceptual truths, for which truths about those semantic norms do have the meanings as their truth makers, even if what assertions are endorsed by such norms have only, again, just the men and the bachelors for their truth makers. Does that make sense? I guess what I'm saying is, if you want the truth makers to be the meanings, you need to have a semantic assent on the proposition as well. But that might be fine, because that might be what we're after in a post-Quinian conception of analytic truth. I mean, he doesn't seem to want to be post-Quinian. He's just acknowledging that the waters are rough for people who did not want to go along, and then just speaks to the former context with apologies.
Yeah, so he seems to try to I guess get around the issue of everything being, you know, a truth maker for mathematical truths by saying that the necessary connection between the possibilities articulated by mathematical truths somehow are internal relations, I guess, to the mathematical terms, or to the content of the mathematical terms. That section I was not exactly sure what he was saying. This internal relation thing is not something I'm terribly comfortable with.
Really?
Well, what I mean is I'm not sure I fully grasp it.
Okay. So along those lines, something that bothered me was the truth by meaning. I was trying to figure out if that wasn't just identical with this point about internal relations, because if
Interesting.
7 plus 5 equals 12, and he relies on internal relations to show how they're, he says the relation of equality supervenes. Well, if bachelor's unmarried man is analytic, it seems to me it's almost exactly the same as saying unmarried plus man equals bachelor, and you would have the same analysis with internal relations. Instead of saying that it's the meaning that makes it true, it's the internal relation that supervenes on the meaning or whatever, and it's that internal relation that makes it true, or something like that. Why is it a different treatment entirely? Does that make sense? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I think maybe the answer is that it's not a different
question.
treatment entirely. He just hasn't drawn the parallel.
Maybe.
I mean, I think both you and I, Joshua, went to that when Rodrigo was setting out these questions about whether or not this just makes all mathematical truths somehow made true by the same truth maker, and not that's problematic and whatever. And we said, well, he has this stuff later on about how, you know, there's a difference between meaning, truth maker, reference, right? And so sometimes the truth maker could be a meaning, but that doesn't mean that the proposition that is being made true is about that truth maker,
Right.
right? Which is another weird thing too. Like, what's the proposition about? What's the which introduces content as maybe distinguishable from meaning too. So
Yes. In fact, this being Truth Maker track and also reading Brandom and just recently Davidson, Truth and Predication, because there is something about this propositional unity that seems very similar to logic preserving truth, in that there's something about the structure that seems to preserve truth, but it can't make it true, it preserves it. And so in these cases of like mathematical truth, there's no content unless you have some sort of, like it's the numbers are realized in the world or something. There's abstract entities that is referred, whatever,
Yes.
whatever that account is, but still at the moment of saying that 7 + 5 is true, or any sort of analytic meaning is true, it's almost like there's a pluralistic kind of truth where there's like truth as consistency or preservation, and then truth as, well, this relation with the world making true. And there's like this tension here, and I think it really shows up in this distinction between truth by meaning or terms and truth by internal relation. And there's like a lot more there, and he just kind of glosses over it. But I do see the need to depend on both to account for some of these problems. But I don't know. It almost seems like there's two conceptions of truth at play here in the background.
well, yeah, there's certainly a multiple ways that something can make a proposition true, right? There's definitely,
Well,
some truth makers are objects, like so.
I'm not sure, because
Bob is the
only
truth
one way.
maker for
The
Bob
truth,
exists.
there's one way, the truth maker relation way, and the truth maker is a portion of reality.
Right. Yeah.
But the truth maker may
it
not
could
be
be-
unique, but
Truth maker is
it may
not unique, but the relation is unique. It is the truth maker relation. It's the what does he call it?
Well, that's just necessitation. That's all he gives us on that.
The cross-categorical necessitation is the
Cross-categorical,
truth-making relation. That is the relation. That is the way of making something true. So it's
Right.
not a account.
Yeah, but on either side of that relationship, on one side is a proposition, right? Clearly.
Yeah.
But the side on the other side, you could put a lot of different chunks of reality in there. You
Right.
can put an object, you can put a state of affairs, you can put a meaning, which he also presumably he says, I don't want to get into the business of telling you what a meaning is, but if he provides a naturalistic, empirical deflationary account, it'll be another type of chunk of reality, right? Like the meaning of the term bachelor is maybe a history of use or something like that, or so that'll be a chunk of reality.
yeah.
So yeah, there can be, but it's a very different kind of chunk of reality than, say, Bob is a chunk of reality that makes Bob's exist true. So yeah, so there's.
But if meaning is just prior use, then that is the chunk of reality. So it's still not meanings making true. It's still that portion of reality, or the prior.
Well, yeah, no, but I think it is, because that's all meanings are. It'll be whatever account he gives of meaning will be what gives, so whatever account of objects will be what it is when I say an object makes it true that that object exists. You'd still have to have an account of what an object is, right? And
Right,
so
but what I'm saying
have
is,
to have an account of what a meaning is. But that account could make meanings just yet another chunk of the actual world.
right, but what I'm saying is, if meanings just are another chunk of the world, and it seems kind of like the meanings of words in the analytic explanation or analysis is the same as the internal relations of the mathematical equation. I guess it comes down to what he means by internal relations, and why that would be a different type of truth making than
Right.
truth making, or this cross, categorical necessitation. I guess that's what I'm unsure about. This seems like almost like a implicit pluralist account.
In this or in the other, or in the Davidson? Sorry, you were bringing up a lot of things in Armstrong here.
This specifically, yeah, because this internal relation is doing a lot of work, and it seems to be distinct from meanings, if meanings just are portions of the world.
No. The internal relation. What's weird is that he's trying to be what's difficult is that he's trying to be deflationary about it. He's
Right.
saying that the internal relation is not an ontological addition, right? And he says internal relations are not unreal, but they are not an addition of being to their terms.
Right.
That I'm not sure. And
It's just there is no third man argument to be had
Right.
here, right? That the relation is not itself another thing in the world that needs to be accounted for. The relation is just.
I mean, does he think of all relations like this? Presumably he calls them internal relations because he's distinguishing them from other relations. I mean, he
That's what I'm getting.
he
Yes.
even
Yeah, the ones that are
even
not dependent on the existence of something else to it. You know, like, so the relationship of me being to the east of San Francisco is not an internal relation to me because it depends on San Francisco. Right.
But okay, but the first sentence of the section, he says, I want to argue here that the terms of the relation are sufficient as truth makers.
yes.
Right.
And so the terms, I mean, are we just back to the meanings as being true then?
Well, isn't that the same as like the bear being on the mat is enough to make it true that the bear's on the mat?
But right, so if the meanings are the portions of the world that are the truth makers for the truth bearer, then the meaning does make it true. But it also means that the meaning just is reference, which he denies.
No. For analytic truths, I mean, he wants to.
Yes.
Yeah, for analytic truths, he wants to. He doesn't want the. He says. He likes the definition that an analytic truth is a truth is analytically true if and only if it is true solely in virtue of the meaning of the words in which it is expressed. We do not, however, want to say that the truth is a truth about words. That would seem to turn it into a contingent truth, which it is not. But how else is the phrase in virtue of to be construed? Truth makers can come to the rescue, I suggest. A bachelor is an unmarried adult male is about bachelors and attributes certain properties to them. So it refers to bachelors and their properties, but the truth maker for this proposition is solely the meanings of the words in which it is stated, in particular, the meaning of the word bachelor and its identity with the meaning of adult unmarried male. So the truth maker is the meanings, but the sentence is not about meanings. It's about bachelors and their properties. It's about a bunch of human beings.
Yeah, so strangely, the statement is about things in the world, and yet they're not what makes it true. The meaning is what makes it true.
Right. But if I say something like,
I mean, it's
Bob is
just
a
he's really
bachelor,
just commit to the analytic.
if I say something like,
truths.
but how could that then be necessary? Well, it could be that given what meanings are in the world, there's a necessary connection between these two, bachelors and unmarried maleness. Just like you could say, given that you say something is to the right, then there must exist something to be to the left. You can't have the meanings of those have that necessary opposition built in, right?
Yeah.
So to say that something is as a bachelor, it necessarily is to say it's an unmarried male because the way those meanings are, whatever they are in the world, that's just what it is.
I think that Josh's question a little bit earlier is the right one that has to be posed to Armstrong, which would make him have to make some hard choices, which is just like, if we say that, if we're saying that these terms have content, bachelor, being a bachelor, being a man, or being an adult male, being unmarried, if these have content, if they express properties, then there is a question about the sum property of being unmarried and being an adult male, as to whether or not, in some sense, that just is identical to or equal to being a bachelor, and whether or not there is an internal relation there, or
Right.
or not. And if there isn't, I mean, if there's, if you're not, it's unclear as to why you would make one move in one case and the other move and and the other move in the other case. Like what principled reason there is for treating these cases as different. He's not.
I'm not sure that there is.
I don't think he brings
I don't think
that out.
I don't think that there is a, because you're saying there aren't. I think in effect you're saying there aren't two properties.
Right. Just like you aren't saying
so
just like you aren't saying 7 + 5 expresses anything different from 12. They express the same thing, which is why the relation is internal to 7 and 5.
Right.
Just like it ought to be internal to being unmarried and being an adult male.
No, that's why I'm saying he could ultimately say, no, it's very similar here. It's very similar.
Yeah, but the other case isn't a matter of meaning, at least according to him.
Well, you just said it was.
No, I'm saying it's not clear how to tell the difference given the resources he's mustered here. He could have said either account for the mathematical or the bachelor case. And I'm not sure it wouldn't have made sense as he's written it.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure that I see that there's a big difference between the two strategies, such that you have to account for why he didn't the same
also
account
if meaning,
for both, because it seems like that he maybe either he did kind of get
right.
the same account for both, or
also if meaning is referenced, then he's screwed. So like, he's clearly implicitly committing himself to meaning not being referenced.
No, it's interesting.
Right.
He does say meaning is not referenced, but then
yeah,
of truth of predication, because he says explicitly the terms of the relation. So that's essentially like saying it's not the reference to the things in the proposition that make the proposition true, but it's the relation, right? And so he tries to avoid this third man argument by saying it's the internal relation of the meanings that make it true, of that relational meaning. So bachelor is unmarried man. 7 + 5 is or equals 12. It's that internal relation that makes it true, not the meaning as reference to the things in the world that make it true, right? So is there a property in the world of relating, of being a bachelor? Like that's really what's at stake. If that property is in the world, you have the third man argument. If that property is the relation, then you don't.
Yeah, I think maybe he does slip into the analyticity thing for the math, essentially, because you're right, he does switch all of a sudden to talking about terms rather than talking about the empirical possibilities that those terms are supposed to express according to what he was calling his possibilist theory of math. He then all of a sudden at the end there switches to focusing on the language. So I don't I don't know. Maybe he does switch to at the end, underhandedly to giving an analytic account of the math there. But if that's the case, then perhaps their analyticity and these internal relations things are not really different at all for him.
Yeah.
If they are, he hasn't shown us how to separate them.
Right. Exactly.
Right. But
if they are actually distinct, he hasn't shown us yet how to separate them.
But if in neither case he needs to postulate a crazy metaphysics, then I think he's fine with that. Like he's even
he may be fine with it. Yeah, he may be. Yeah, I mean, as long as he's not postulating necessary existences, I think he's probably fine with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I mean, yeah. Yeah. And then and he actually separates conceptual truths from analytic truths for
okay.
He says he treats them the same then.
Yeah. That's
This was the one part of the paper that I had no idea what he was talking about.
Conceptual
So
truths.
specifically, the truth maker is, okay, so right after perception, he says, a conceptual truth that veridical perception conceptually necessitates that what is perceived is the cause of the perception. That is a truth about veridical conception and causation, but its truth maker is our concepts of perception and causation, whatever concepts are. I don't know what he's saying.
Oh, so I mean, there is a debate about whether or not, so, you know, there's all those crazy claims about, you know, whether or not veridical perception is just to perceptually access a truth, right?
Yeah.
And you could be, there are cases where, you know, you learn by looking at a stopped clock that it's 2 o'clock, and it happens to be 2 o'clock just by coincidence. So was that a veridical perception or something like that? Or you, you know, there's some sense of like a mirror set up, so you think that you see someone in the kitchen, but you know it's that person actually has no cause in the experience that you have, but it fools you into thinking that there's someone into the kitchen. You know, it's an illusion that you're experiencing, but there happens to be someone in the kitchen. Or so so he's saying that there could be some conceptual connections between things like veridical perception and the fact that if I vertically part of what it is to vertically perceive X is that X is part of the causal story of how is the cause of that perception in me. If that's part of the conceptual unpacking of the concept of veridical perception,
Yeah.
right, maybe that's not an analytic truth, but its truth maker is going to be our concepts of perception and our concepts of causation, whatever those concepts are. So it could be that with analyticity, the truth maker is meaning, even though the sentences are really about things in the world, but the truth makers for them are meanings. And it could be that the truth maker for a sentence like, if you vertically perceive X, X caused your perception, is the concepts, even though that statement is about your eyeballs and your ears and your nose and the world in which you live. It's about those things, but the truth maker for it is just the concepts of perception and the concepts of causation, right?
Right. Conceptual truth can be treated in the same way as you treat analyticity, which my confusion was I wasn't sure why he was treating analyticity differently than the necessary truth.
Right, and then you might be like, and why not?
Different
for meaning.
Exactly.
And like, well, there might be some reason. So if I'm right that if I'm right that meanings and concepts are different, or something like that, or if conceptual connections don't always reduce to so I guess what you see here is the intuition is that necessary connections between concepts might not always reduce to necessary connections in the meaning of the terms that we use.
Right.
To describe. So there might be some other thing, like it might be that there's some necessary connection, conceptual connection between justice and equality or something like that, right? But that's not just about the meanings of the terms. It might be some sort of substantial thing we discover in doing our ethics, right? Yeah. So yeah, this is at the end here, he's throwing out a lot of things with like, if I were to do all this body of work to sort out this, then here's how my truth maker stuff might help.
Yeah. Well, and he does have a whole book about truth makers, and this is much of this work is incorporated into just one chapter of it, and there's even more about modal truths and stuff. But in the very last paragraph, he essentially answers Josh's question by suggestion. He says, how wide is the scope of the analytic conceptual necessities? If the deflationary line that I have been arguing for about the ontology that lies behind necessary truths is correct, right, the one that involves internal relations, one might consider reviving the idea that necessary truths are, all of them, analytic and or conceptual.
Yep.
So that
is a speculative suggestion, Right. So in other words, he probably is going that direction. He probably is reviving analyticity as necessity and so on.
And
Or
whether,
I should say it the other way around, necessity as analyticity or whatever. Yeah.
and so whether or not 7
Yeah.
plus 5 is 12 is an analytic or conceptual issue, we'd have to
Right.
see
And
why
says
he
that
doesn't
is that
think
is
that
a
the
he says
conceptual
that
and
is
the
a
analytic are
speculative suggestion, though.
Yeah.
Just to say, not beyond the scope of the paper.
Yeah.
But
He does write a book about it, so he might.
in fact,
I think he has a chapter on math.
he actually
in the book.
blows up this paper into 3 chapters: truth makers from
That's
Modal
what I
Truth,
thought,
part
yeah.
1, part 2, and then numbers and classes. That's roughly 45 pages altogether. So yeah, and then previous chapters include negative truths, which I'm uncomfortable with how he handled that. So yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. The book is actually published a year after this paper. So this paper must have been a kind of draft of his manuscript for the book.
Yeah.
yeah, preview of coming attraction.
Speaking of coming attractions, what do you want to read for next week?
That's a good question.
Good question.
Not sure. What's on our list?
I don't. It's been so long. That's my answer.
We could look at the other anthology and see if there's anything that.
That would be a good. This would be a good time to do that, since we did finish the setting the stage. Oh, I remember. I wrote this down. And hold on a second. I did write down what we would read. It would be. How far back do we have to go? Oh, wrong window.
I mean, there's quite a few in the current debate section of the law that
Oh, here it is.
possibly.
It's Rodriguez and Pereira. No, Rodriguez Pereira. Why? That's in the first collection. It's the very last one. Why truth makers and the postscript. And one motivation is that it's in both anthologies. And then something by Bigelow, because he kept coming up and we were interested to look further. And then the Horwich, Being and Truth, also in that first collection. So that was what made the list so far, but I hadn't actually looked again at that other collection. Let me do that right now.
Horwich is another name that just keeps coming up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Oh, well, I mean, it might be interesting to read either Hornsby or Joseph Melia, who try to do without truth without truth makers. And that's it. Nothing else grabs me. Although, of course, after skimming, there could be something worth looking at.
One that grabs me is the Josh Parsons. Are there irreducibly relational facts?
Sure.
This came up in the Davidson. I'm very interested in this. If we sort of remove all the objects from the world, are there still these relations that were there, or is it like what?
Yeah.
Right, and it seems like this is pretty crucial to this truth-making relation. Is
Yeah, the stuff at the end here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, I wonder about these internal relations, which keep coming up as well.
Exactly.
Which one was
It's
that
the-
in?
it's the same thing,
Because the idea of the internal relations
Oh yeah,
is that
that's
you
on
just
the
need
low.
they're made true entirely by the terms or the relata, perhaps.
It's the same thing. That's what Parsons is writing about, internal relations, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
think
let's
that's right.
just
I would love to read that.
Yeah, you want to read that next, since we could do these in order. Horwich, Parsons, and then Rodriguez Pereira, and then from the other, and then anything from the other anthology. Okay, so
yeah,
Horwich for next week. That's 15 pages. All right.
That sounds good.
Ta-da.
Cool.
Sounds good.